This is for our baby from Jordan to Macaulay.